up front. Can you record a local recording using, are you on a PC?
Yeah.
If you just search for voice recorder in the search bar, it's just a standard Windows app.
Sure.
It looks very dumb, but if you just press the blue microphone button, it should start recording.
Okay, yeah, I'm recording it.
Cool. I just like to do that in case the internet drops out for a second or whatever. Just have a sort of a backup audio file. Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and get started, and then we can jump in. Welcome to the Healthcare Design Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bennett, and today I'm joined by Noam Platt, healthcare architect at Nelson and founder of makegood.design, to talk about interfacing with the health department, going over FGI guidelines, and the role of the healthcare architect in making the world a better place. Noam, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I'm really excited to be here.
So Noam is my first guest who I've only met virtually, and it's a great example of how small our industry really is. And people talk about 6 degrees of separation for Kevin Bacon, but in healthcare design, I feel like within architects, engineers, contractors, vendors, you don't need to go more than 4 connections, and you know everybody in the industry. So it's a small group. You'll run into each other multiple times throughout your career. So I always give advice to make sure you don't burn bridges, because you'll probably need to cross that bridge sometime later in the future. So Noam, can you just kind of introduce yourself, talk a little bit about how you got into healthcare design?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And it is a small world, and that's I think a great thing about this field, because there's a lot of really good knowledge sharing, and we all come to it really with the goal to increase our health of our communities. And I think that's one of the really cool things about this field. It's not just the commercialism of it. It's really about improving the world. I started my healthcare design journey when I was in school. I was fortunate enough to be asked to do a project for a local medical school. It was a surgical skills lab. And for those of you out there wondering what that is, it's a non-patient care space. It's kind of a surgeon training space, qualifying space. There's these little tasks set up so the surgeons peel grapes and tie knots with tweezers and these kinds of things that are then set off to be certified to renew their licenses. So this is something that's pretty common in academic medical centers. So pretty small space, but a really interesting project. And I took this project to my school at the time, Louisiana State University, and said, hey, let's start a healthcare design curriculum off of this. They did a great job in finding a local ACHA architect to then teach that class. So that's how I got started. I think it was my 4th year of architecture school. And we stuck with that theme until I graduated with the same architect. And his name is Rick Lipscomb. He's a phenomenal architect and a great mentor of mine. And every semester we kind of upped the complexity of classes and coursework until I graduated. And the 3 students who participated in that, we're all qualified healthcare architects now. So it was really a unique program. But, I think for me, I was getting fatigued, I think, of what people think of as the typical architecture school projects, the floating art museums and these kinds of things. And it was a really nice way to input this really realistic project type with really real world implications. So
yeah, the trendy artist residence work live community. Yeah, those were great.
Absolutely. So this gave us a real grounding, but also, as you know, there's a lot of stuff to dig into and learn about evidence-based design and learn about how to plan and learn about using the FGI. That was all part of the course curriculum. So I really feel like I got a head start in healthcare design, and it's just been a really great journey since then.
That's super cool. I mean, I say a lot that a lot of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing here with this podcast and with some of the other resources I share is that most people don't get a chance to learn about this in college. And so the fact that you got to is pretty neat. So that's cool. Well, let's dig in a little bit here. I know professionally you have had experience on both sides of the Department of Health. First, I just want to hear a little bit about what your employment experience was like with the Department of Health at being a regulator. Can you tell us a little bit about, what that's like?
Absolutely, absolutely. So those of you who have designed anything really have dealt with the regulatory sphere, and it's even more comprehensive when you're dealing with licensing healthcare facilities.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to work for the Washington State Department of Health, actually remotely from my house in New Orleans, for about a year. And every state has a different regulatory pathway. They have different rules, obviously, but they also have different ways they certify buildings. In Washington State's particular instance, they have a team called the CRS team, Construction Review Services. And we really review everything to do with the building, from architectural, healthcare design, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, a really comprehensive review, which is kind of rare that one group does that full review. So I never considered myself a code geek or being super even that great at understanding codes. And when I started to work there, really kind of diving in with both feet. And I compare it as kind of going back to school. And it's a real opportunity to not only learn the codes and regulations, but apply them in real time. And, I got to say, it's really fun. And I recommend any architect who is interested in doing something like this is they should do it for a time, just so they can learn and see how it works. We viewed our role as regulators as actually team members. We felt like it was our responsibility to lead the design teams and ownership teams through the compliance process. So we encouraged communication with us early and often. We made ourselves available as much as we could for conference calls and drawing review, formal and informal, throughout the regulatory process. And it worked really well in that when things came up, we were able to work as a team through them. The problems, as I'm sure you're aware, when there's no communication and then things get ready to open and we have $2 or $3 million worth of errors or omissions or problems. So being a regulator, it's a big word with a big R, but it's really about being ingratiated with all these design teams and working with them to ultimately improve patient outcomes. So it's a really interesting position to have, and you get to see a lot of the field.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I have permitted projects in 4, 5, 6 states so far, and there's a quite a diversity in how those departments interact with the design teams. I've had on one end, similar to how you just described, where pretty open-ended ability to access and review, and even in areas where we were maybe getting a little bit, we were skirting the line of requirements, but being able to present our quote argument or proposal for why we're doing it this way, and being able to walk them through it and get them on board with it. And on the other end, I've worked in states where it's like you submit your drawings into a blind portal, and then you get a PDF with comments 3 weeks later, without any knowledge of like who's doing it or are you next in line. It's just kind of like you just wait until you get served what you're going to get served, and then you have to deal with the comments as you can understand them. Occasionally you can try to ask for clarity, but so there's a big spectrum there on how helpful the regulatory body is with the design team. So it's cool to hear you were part of that more open-ended group. During your time in reviewing these projects in Washington, what things did you find architects were tripping up most on? Like, was there a theme that you, like, oh, everyone's forgetting to add XYZ to their drawings, or were they kind of all over the mark with things?
Off the top of my head, there was a bit of all over the markness, and you could really tell which architects had a lot of experience with healthcare documentation, especially when I got into reviewing ambulatory surgical facilities that weren't necessarily associated with healthcare systems, but this is like private doctors groups who might hire a more inexperienced architect that needs a lot more guidance. But even the very well-known names and international firms would often miss stuff. And off the top of my head, the main thing I saw a lot of people missing was adequate storage for surgery. So you're supposed to have 50 square feet per OR for the first 2, and then I think 25 after that, depending on the guidelines. That was something that was constantly calling out. And also people not quite understanding the appropriate adjacency relationships. And it's difficult to parse the language in the FGI. There's a very important glossary of terms that has under location. There's directly accessible, immediately accessible. All these things have really specific meanings. And oftentimes we read them as plain English, but not as their defined terms. So it is complicated. Yeah.
So that was kind of leading into kind of my next thought here, is that the FGI is, or at least your ability to decipher the code is kind of a hallmark of a healthcare architect. There are so many what appear to be often like circular references. You go to one section, refers you to the next section, which refers you to the next section, which sometimes ultimately ends with if provided, then this is how you should do it. And you're often looking for, like, I just want to be told that I do need this or I don't need this. And so sort of there's two things there. One is the flexibility of FGI to not be so prescriptive that it hampers health systems' abilities to provide like the right level of care or right amount of spaces for their care, but also the clarity of direction for when you do provide a service of what's actually needed to be there. So instead of just defining like, here's the bare minimums you need and hopefully you can figure out the rest on your own. That's kind of how those multi-referential sections work. I wonder if, when you're either you as a designer now or looking at it from the mind of a regulator, how do you kind of approach those projects where maybe the requirements are not as clear at the outset? How do you kind of work your way through FGI?
It's a great question. I think part of it is just, I think a lot of people get frustrated because some states will interpret sections differently. And that's just an outgrowth of regulators being people and understanding the books to the best of our ability. Yeah. And there are some references, by the way, that are circular and quote broken and are very confusing. Hopefully less so as the editions come out and things like that. It's really about the intent and the care given. So when I approach a regulatory problem, it always starts with what's happening to the patient. And this applies whether you're talking about the FGI, NFPA 99, 101. It really is, what is the state of the patient and what happens if XYZ, if the power goes out, if we're trying to do this kind of procedure. And that is how the books, I believe, are really structured. And if you approach it with that mindset and not a predetermined solution of the building you need, the books, I think, do a better job at leading you through that process. That being said, they are still just kind of dense and complicated to use. And it takes quite a bit of trial and error and, reading, rereading, and doing some mental mapping to get to the solution you are looking for. It would be nice for the books to optimize some of their information and have it much more clear. But there's a reason it's written like this. It's sort of a committee writes these books, and it's very important that committee has diverse viewpoints and is sourced from a variety of different professions within healthcare and healthcare design. I had a chance to be on part of or assist in one of these committees in the latest writing. And, all the lines in the book are analyzed for their benefit to patients, for their cost of implications on construction, the flexibility that a healthcare system can have. The book is really meant to provide flexibility, but also safeguards. So it's a tension, but it's a really important aspect of what we do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important distinction to make, is that the FGI is not it's not a design guide. It's a code, and so it doesn't provide you the sort of step-by-step process to design the space. But so I actually did this earlier today. I had an initial sort of kickoff meeting with the project where the conversation started by some of the users sharing with what they need the space to be. We need this to do this, do this to this. And I kind of stopped a few minutes in and just kind of had to step back and follow the patient through the front door and then back out the door after they've completed care, to kind of map the process, kind of like you said. The FGI is sort of structured in a way that it moves through the patient's process, through the care, the model of care, and then along the way, all those regulations kind of drop in like that. So I think finding a way to map that patient experience onto your project and sort of trace the nodes through the FGI to get to your requirements for the project is a good place to start when you're trying to kind of pull together what's required for your projects.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's the right way to do it.
I want to kind of move on a little bit from here. Is there anything else in the sort of the FGI and code review things that you feel like we haven't covered that would be important for someone who maybe even hasn't gone through a DPH review?
Construction documents, as architects, we make books. It's kind of the base function, right? And a set of construction documents doesn't necessarily mean a license to do healthcare stuff in a building. So I hopefully will be giving a presentation on healthcare design about this exact thing. How do we draw to ensure the regulators are understanding our intent and the kind of care that we've been tasked to design spaces to deliver? Those are just really important things to keep in mind when you zoom out from, the chipboard details and the finishes and stuff, that we need to come up with ways to describe the spaces in a way that licensing bodies can understand as well.
Yeah, that's a good point that I kind of glossed over at the beginning, is that the Department of Health, or whatever the terminology is for the state that you're in, acts as an overlay regulation, permitting process within. If you're moving from another industry within architecture, and you're mostly just familiar with getting a county, a city building permit, this is an additional layer to that process that often those permitting bodies locally are referring back to the state, looking for their sort of thumbs up before they issue their building permit. So even just in terms of project management, building in the necessary review time periods, which are often at least 2 stages in terms of an initial submission, comments, and then a resubmission for review. Those processes need to be done in time for you to get your building permit as well. So if you've never gone through that, be sure to build that into your process. It's not sort of submitting both to the health department and to the city for a permit at the same time, unless you want to wait around for the health review.
And understand what your particular authority having jurisdiction really needs plan-wise. In Louisiana, the state fire marshal does the FGI review, and they're looking for a plan that has the FGI code numbers on the plan relating to the items in the code, and that's not something we had in Washington State. So it really is a state-by-state thing, and you just need to be aware of that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You bring up the individual states. There's a nice little adoption map on the FGIguidelines.org website. I'll link it in the show notes, but you can see which version of the code your state has currently adopted, because that's not a national code. It would be nice to get there someday, or to sort of be aligned with whatever IBC code and other relevant building codes are adopted. But I'm in a state that is currently on 2018. You're in Louisiana, it's 2014, I think.
Correct.
But Georgia just 20 minutes south of me has adopted 2022. So within not very much distance, there are a lot of different codes that are accepted. So you need to be sure you're checking your health department website for the codes that they're currently using. So kind of moving on from here, I think the idea of FGI and the health department, their goals are from a regulatory standpoint, quote, ensuring our built environment is of a high quality, making it better is what their ultimate goal is. I think what I'm also, you have a bit of a virtual reputation as someone who's trying to make the world a better place, both through your day job, quote, and your side stuff. I want to kind of talk a little bit about what you see as either the role and the abilities of healthcare architects to help their communities with their professional skills.
So, I think this applies to all architects. So I just want to make that clear. I think as architects, we make up I think it's like 0.0003 or 0.003% of the population. Yet,
yeah, I've heard that
every building is designed by us, or us as a team with the client. And I think there's kind of a lack of public awareness, as certainly I knew when I was growing up, that people are making these decisions. It's a small group of people. And it's, we really make our environments and we remake them every, 30, 40, 50 years. And within 30, 40, 50 years as an industry, we really, can create massive change. Architects have all the skills to create change at the building level, personal level, individual level. And my organization is really about democratizing the tools of design and allowing, that change to happen and kind of creating that new world that I envision and a lot of people envision, a more equitable world. So I focus on designing things for the disabled community, specifically here in New Orleans, but we share designs online, and I'm part of a number of international organizations that do this work as well. And
it's cool. So you're talking about Make Good Design. You can find it. Makegood.design is your website. And I'm curious how you got into that, even and what the process was like for getting that started.
Sure. Yeah. So I think everybody is touched by disability. We have family members, friends, ourselves, and we are all, if you consider, if you're non-disabled, you're temporarily non-disabled. I mean, it's something that we'll all enter into at some point in our lives. There's no doubt. That's one thing I can say with certainty. And many people have this realization where they get injured and they end up on crutches that, like, wow, the world is not designed for this. There's a lot of things that we take for granted that become very apparent that we're not designed for the full breadth, what I call the full breadth of human experience. Not just designing for 90% of people, because that 10% of people is a lot of people, right? And
it is a lot.
Yeah. So I worked at a summer, really got me going in this. I worked at a summer camp for kids growing up who are disabled and things like that. But I actually have a cousin in Israel who started this organization called Tikkun Olam Makers, and I still work with them today. And they put on these make-a-thon events, or kind of like hackathons, bringing together, designers and occupational therapists and just like, people who are interested with the need knowers, who's typically a disabled person that has a specific need that needs filled. It's kind of a cool terminology, need knower.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to participate in a couple of these events in the United States starting in 2016. And it was through those experiences that I saw the power of just putting a little bit of design time into some of these unmet problems. And because I'm, simple, kind of a simpleton, I chose some pragmatic problems, like a robotic shelf, right? So somebody in a wheelchair can't necessarily roll up to a dresser and pull out the drawers, and there's not this kind of storage furniture purpose built for people in wheelchairs. So we built a robotic tower that had these kind of triangle shaped shelves that rose to a level and swung out so somebody in a wheelchair could roll up. And and grab something. Extremely simple. We had a cool prototype in a few days, and it really just shows you that, you know, you can put in a very moderate amount of effort and get a huge result, because this is such a need in this field. I think of all of these projects as like empty glass, and, you know, as you work on it, you pour in water and you pour in water, and eventually that glass will be full and it'll actually overflow into new projects and new glasses. And it's just like a progression. So I view the job of architects and the job of us designers is to find these unmet needs and fix them. And a lot of the times it's really simple solutions that just haven't been implemented, or, you know, oftentimes were discovered a while ago and forgotten. So it's really important for all of us to have this wider awareness of our environments, but even more important to teach that awareness to our communities. And that is what a big thing, what I do when I teach classes, is like teaching curiosity and allowing people the space to kind of open their minds to, you know, hey, how would I use my kitchen if, you know, I ended up losing a hand? Or, you know, what would be my challenges getting in and out of my house if I was in a wheelchair? And that allows people to kind of take this outsider thinking and use their empathy in a really strong way to come up with these innovative solutions. And it's a growing field. It's nascent, but it's a growing field. And I'm happy to say I've seen it just in the time I've been doing this in a real kind of dedicated way in the past few years. I've seen the field grow almost exponentially. So it's a really exciting time to be involved.
That's cool. Yeah, the idea of a need knower is you know, an interesting concept. I wonder, is there, you know, if people are inspired by what you're doing and want to find ways that they could either help what you're doing or help their own communities wherever they are there ways of connecting with local need knowers in some accessible way?
Absolutely. I mean, you probably have a disability advocacy group in your local communities. I'll be speaking at a conference in Kent County, Michigan, in Grand Rapids next month. And it's a really cool conference that brings together disability advocates and architects. So that's going to be really interesting. There's a great website if you want to get involved with this in a super tangible way called Makers Making Change. And this is a Canadian organization. And this is one of my favorite places on the internet. They have a whole forum just filled with unmet challenges. Hey, I need help, you know, putting on my mascara. You know, there's just lists and lists of the stuff, and you can see people working on them and sending prototypes and getting feedback and doing this active design. They also have a fully open source library of a bunch of different assistive technologies.
Yeah.
And people can request these, and then individuals like me, like you, or anyone who has a 3D printer can actually fulfill those requests. So
cool.
That's a really easy way to get involved and make like direct impact in somebody's life, really simply too, because a lot of these things don't even take that long to necessarily print or make. So that's a really good resource. I mentioned Tikkun Olam Makers as well, tomglobal.org. Similar organization, more international reach than North America, but has a similar system as well. So those are two really good resources, and I encourage anyone who's interested in learning about assistive tech and getting involved to check them out.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely put a link for Makers Making Change in the show notes. I think it sounds like an awesome concept and something that is easily to access, which I feel like, you know, you could maybe be critical of making like volunteering opportunities so easy, but really now it's so easy, there's no excuse to not help. So that's really cool to hear about the impact that you're having and others like you are having in this sort of assistive technology and need filling, you know, community. Is super cool. Well, I can tell a mind like yours is always thinking about the next thing. Are there other things that either within healthcare design or design adjacent that you've been thinking of, or, you know, sort of moonshot ideas?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the questions I ask myself are like, what are the tools that we're going to be using in the next 30 years? It's kind of like from now until the end of our careers, hopefully, you know, we'll retire. And when you go to these events, the healthcare design conferences and the summer leadership things, like there aren't that many younger people. It's really a field that is older in healthcare design. I think the average age of American College of Healthcare Architects certificate is 55. So
Yeah.
It's going to be up to people like me and you to build those tools for the future. And, I've done quite a bit of research trying to figure out, which tools have the most acute need right now and, in the next kind of 10 to 15 years. And so that's been a really interesting journey, just talking to, over 100 different people in the field about what their needs are, what their frustrations are, and how the best way to approach a new tool or new tools to address those. And, some of my findings are, anything we layer on top of Revit is just going to make Revit even more so complicated that no one wants to use it, and but back to our earlier conversation, a lot of people just need help with the FGI. A lot of people need help understand, not just the FGI, but need help understanding the regulatory compliance obligations that each project have. And you've seen some tools come out around that, and I think you'll see a lot more coming up here in the next kind of few years. There's obviously a lot to be said about AI and I'm sure you've seen all the really cool stuff that's been doing. I think a lot of these projects I see that use AI, especially AI and BIM, I just get the feeling that the people making them, and I'm probably wrong saying this, but haven't delivered a project recently. Like there's so much that goes into these projects. There's so much human to human interaction, communication. It would be great to have a tool to do, shop drawing review or things like that. But there's a lot of this field is still manual, and even the stuff we've pulled into BIM, it gets redrawn by a steel supplier and then redrawn again.
Right.
So, the idea that, I said this earlier, that architects make books, the idea that we take 3D information, put it into a 2D page, a literal page that gets put back into 3D, it's kind of a totally inefficient idea, so.
Right. Yeah. I think until we're submitting design models to like regulatory boards or to contractors for construction, we are still, a generation away from making that full shift into BIM as an entire industry and not just sort of on the front side of the industry.
Agreed. And I think, until we have that hospital-sized 3D printer, right, that can eat that data and just make the building, it's going to continue to be a manual process, a very tedious and detail-oriented one.
Yeah. Well, Noam, I really appreciate the discussion today. It's really interesting to hear about your experience in the regulatory side of the industry, and then hearing what you're doing in your organization outside of work. And I appreciate you sharing all of that with us today. If people who are listening want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
LinkedIn is great. I'm on LinkedIn, just my name, Noam Platt. On Instagram, makegood.NOLA, NOLA, like New Orleans, Louisiana, is a really great way to reach me as well. I'm very active on there, posting about all the cool projects we're doing. Definitely reach out if you're interested in becoming involved, if you want to take on some of these design projects. And if you're a healthcare architect, your health systems have people that need this assistive tech. I mean, I've gone from being the architect for them to being the assistive tech supplier, for the same organization. So definitely reach out within your own networks as well and say, hey, this is something we could do together as a team. It's just an extension of our design practice. And I think you'll be met with lots of really good feedback on that.
Awesome. Well, for more information like this and other ongoing healthcare design learning opportunities, you can sign up for the Healthcare Design newsletter at visiting healthcaredesignnetwork.com. If you found today's discussion valuable, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to stay up to date with each new episode. And as always, thanks for joining us. I'll talk to you soon. Awesome.
Thank you. How'd that go?
That was great.
Right.
You did better than Josh.
Oh, Joshy boy. I miss, let's see, I hit stop on here.
Yeah, if you hit stop, it'll just like save it in there, and you should be able to email it.
I miss having him as a boss. He was a good guy to work with. It was sad when he left, but I get it. Nelson is, there's a reason I asked not to talk too much about it.
I hear you.
It's just a firm, nothing special.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, are you going to Healthcare Design Conference around the corner?
It's in New Orleans this year.
Yeah.
Yes. So I hopefully will be there. I mean, I should be there. That, like I just mentioned, the aforementioned Nelson issues, but I submitted this regulatory kind of discussion and hopefully I'll be a speaker. It's kind of long and short of it.
Cool.
Even though my co-submitter is now taking a federal healthcare design job and for like the Army, so he doesn't think he'll be able to join because of just conflicts of interest. I'm not sure, but
sure.
But yeah, I'll be there, and I'm sure you'll be there.
Yeah, I'm planning to be there, and kind of hope that by then some people have heard a little bit about what I'm doing here and can drum up a little interest that way. But yeah, it's such a great. Have you ever been to the conference before?
Oh yeah, I've been a number of times.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing, Mike, by the way, is like super awesome. Like,
thanks, man.
I'm glad to see a young person doing it as well. It's beyond a need that we have for something like this. We need to get more people excited, and we need to demystify healthcare design because it's such an important and like fascinating field. And if you ever need help finding guests, you just let me know. I got a whole stable of people that I can goad into getting on this podcast in all different kinds of roles. So just feel free to reach out for sure. I'm a big supporter of what you're building, and I want to keep supporting it any way I can.
Well, thanks a lot. I'll definitely reach out. And I'd love to to get more people on. I've been thankful that a lot of people have had your similar perspective and been like, yeah, this is great. I'd love to connect you with other people. And so, I'm hoping that this just ends up being a helpful resource for the industry, and that's great. If you're ever in the market for a remote healthcare architecture job, just let me know.
Yeah, I might be.
Yeah.
I'll be launching. I didn't want to mention it on the podcast because of Nelson and whatnot, but I'll actually be launching a software tool called Model Healthcare in the next, I think, 2 or 3 months. And it basically distills the FGI for each room type just to like all the bullet points you need, like room size, HVAC requirements, finishes. Yeah. It's just like all the stuff that you have to flip back and forth. This is just the minimum product. I have bigger plans for it.
Yeah.
And kind of gets in an interface where you can, make custom rooms and sort it into your facilities and kind of like build out a scope of a facility with all your requirements. So when I launch that, I'd love for you to check it out. And
yeah, definitely. It sounds awesome.
And, maybe come back on to talk about it some more. But but for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the healthcare design field doesn't have a lot of tools that exist for it yet. I've sketched out several of my own that I got too much going on. I've got 3 kids also, and
oh my God,
they're very important to me. And so I get as much done as I can, but I also have tried to just be realistic with the fact that I'm not going to get it all done. But maybe through this network someday I just start throwing the ideas out there and someone's like, oh, I like that, I'm going to go do that. And that way the tool can exist.
I know. That's what motivates, I think, all of us. Like, hey, what tools do I need for the future? It's like I said, we're going to be the ones to build it. I've seen some tools that people are building. Foresight Digital is one that comes to mind. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yep.
Super cool, but like, is it something I'm going to be using on a daily basis when I'm like in the weeds? I think that's what motivated me is like, it's like, what can we do with this book? That's really hard to read, and how do we make it easier? But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your ideas too. Like, I've been on doing this for about 1.5 years. I've got lots of experience. I've talked to a lot of VC people, and I've been through some incubators and stuff. Yeah. It's been a whole different world, this business development software stuff, than like the skills that I have as an architect, right? It's a completely different game. So if you ever need any advice or anything, just reach out.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really into that kind of not side of the industry, but to the tech space as well. So I'd love
Yeah.
to connect more. Well, I want to let you go, stick to time, but we should, definitely stay in touch, and definitely let me know when your software is out. But otherwise, we should still keep in touch. I'll be at Healthcare Design, so if nothing else, I'll see you then. But um, otherwise, yeah, I
Good deal.
appreciate your time.
Yeah. When's this coming out?
2 weeks on
Okay.
Thursday, so 1 week and 6 days.
I'll send you the file right now.
Cool. I appreciate
All
it,
right, man.
Noam.
Take it easy.
Yeah, you too.
See ya.